Hi everyone, so this is the last spot that I'm going to kind of comment on. This is the entrance, the new built entrance into the museum of what was once the British prison and now renamed the Underground Prisoners Museum. Important to say, by the way, that for a while, for its earlier main part of its history, it was the museum of the Lechi, of one of the four underground groups, the smallest, maybe the more extreme on the right, and then it became part of a more national civic kind of memory and is now just a general museum for the remembrance of the underground. And of course this is highly political, this is national mythology. It tells the story. You will go in a second and see an absolutely first-rate production film about the life of one character here, and to go round. And you know, as a tourist experience, of course, it's fantastic going into an old prison and telling the story. It doesn't particularly tell the story that much of Arab prisoners. This is not in any apologetic or unapologetic kind of way. It tells the story it's telling a particular story. It doesn't aspire to be any more than that. This is not objective history. But what's very important is that it belongs in the national story of this period, the end of the period of the British and the kind of unsuccessful attempt of the British to rule through force. Included in here are lots of insignia, lots of stories. There's the gallows amongst other else, which is rather grim, although only 2 Jews were executed. Most of the Arabs were executed here. Jews tended to be executed in Akko prison. But nonetheless, a very, very important site, and invites lots of questions. I just want to draw your attention to 1 or 2 very brief ones. Most importantly, we have very dramatic speeches of people before they were executed, and by no means unique to this struggle, but let's focus in on this struggle. In a way, we have the creation of national mythology, of national heroes. Next week, or in a couple of weeks' time, we'll deal with a bit more of this. But what makes somebody a hero in this story? But in a way, the main thing I wanted to say is this. If you remember the idea of the new Jew, immigrants, Chatzei Kinneret, Tel Chai, and we spoke about vision critique methods and the dream of fulfilling an ideology. Underneath it all is a central question which we actually haven't really talked about, which is at what price? What price is anybody willing to stand up for their ideals? We can argue whether they was the right ideals, whether they were interpreted correctly. This is undoubtedly an unfinished argument between left and right in this country about tactics, strategies of the various undergrounds. But the point at which people were willing to die for the struggle of the nation, and that, by the way, will include right and left, religious, secular, Jew and Arab. That, in a way, this is a period which is absolutely bursting with that rather tragic and difficult question. Of course, Alavai, we could all fulfill our dreams without having to think about the opposing force that stops us from doing it, and seeing that, am I willing to lay down my life for that? So this is not supposed to be an elevation of heroism. It's supposed to be a moment for thoughtfulness and contemplation. Again, take the time inside to think as much as to critique the museum. And certainly in the memorial room, there are the faces of people who were killed by the British, Jews, and to think through who they were. And again, even though they're not recognised, all the other people who were also executed by the British for the purpose of ideology, Arab Palestinian nationalists who felt probably no less that they were doing the right thing by their nation. The question is, what questions emerge from that? What do we gain from thinking about in those terms? So I would say, of course, this sets up a large part of national mythology. It sets up an invitation to recognise that the story we're talking about has very painful and difficult parts. It's not just about beautiful poetry of Rachel or righteous indignation in the case of Tel Chai, whatever. It's about a brutal struggle. I want to reference the conversation we had about Jews and power. If you can't fulfill your goals through soft power, at what point does hard power take place? And again, at what price? The idea that people die in the service of the nation. Here it's set up in in a very kind of acute underground kind of struggle against the British kind of way. But that's still included in the oaths of all the of all the military forces, the willingness to die for the country. And that, of course, becomes part of our story, not just historically, but also contemporaneously. So in a way, I mean, you know, all around here at the moment, there are not a small amount of soldiers who are visiting here. You know, imagining how do soldiers in 2022 visit the site, who tells a story going back to the British. You know, that's not really about the past, that's really very much about the present. So there's a lot going on here. The key thing, I think, is about idealism, what price for one's ideals, and trying to slot that into this period of, well, the emergence of a new type of Jewish society and a new type of Jewish community, which has the full range, from farmers to fighters, heroes, less heroic, controversies, politics, and of course the question of what that looks like today.